Welcome to the WagerTalk Podcast for the week ending August 11th. We've got a big show tonight. In fact, this show was so good last week, we're doing it again this week.
Anyone in the studio is going to sound very familiar to last week's show.
I'm going to change everything I said last week.
Are you? Okay. Dave, that was the best show you ever had.
Probably so.
You were witty, you were funny, you were on point.
Yeah. And for those of you guys don't know what we're talking about, we did tape last week's podcast, but the aliens from Area 51 got us in ate it, the computer, whatever. But we're back. We're going to bring you last week's show this week because the main part of the show was our Power 5 conference previews, and we're going to be starting with those first. So, guys, let's go ahead and get into that, and let's start with the ACC. It's a Power 1 conference, and then maybe a couple other teams, but top to bottom, I'm not real thrilled with the ACC. I
remember this joke from last week. Isn't it called Clemson and the others?
Yeah.
Well, it pretty much is. Because Clemson power rates is one of the top 3 teams in the country. And I don't have my number. I left my numbers at home. But I think I've got Miami as the number 2 team in the conference in my power ratings. But they're not even a top 20 team.
Yeah, I have Florida State just in the top 20.
Right.
But I'm very high on Florida State, so agree with you, yes.
Florida State, the only team out of that division that could give Clemson any problems, but let's face it, they're not going to.
Well, no, I forgot my numbers, but just roughly, I think neutral field, I have Clemson by like 16 over Florida State and like 15 over Miami. So they're just way better than everybody else in that league. I think, but, the interesting thing is, and this is why it's not just fine. ESPN can talk about Clemson and nobody else. But from our standpoint, the fact that there's a whole bunch of teams that are really closely packed together, to me, creates a lot of good betting opportunities during the season based on scheduling dynamics and things like that. I like it when you've got a conference with a bunch of teams all within a few points of one another, because that's where, and I know you do too, Marco, because that's where situational stuff really starts to come into play.
No, absolutely, and there's going to be points where Clemson's just going to be overpriced all year.
Sure,
but last year
I don't know if that's accurate or not, because they're so good.
Yeah, they could overcome it.
Yeah.
Yes. But you look at the other side of the division. I could make a case for 3 teams, I think, in the other side, and then there's several teams in there I think have no shot. The 3 teams I'm talking about in the other division, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, Virginia, Miami, and Virginia Tech. I would put Virginia and Miami of Florida head and head, and then I would have Virginia Tech behind them.
I have Virginia lower. And I actually, there's a change from last week because I redo my power ratings once camp opens and I start to get different information. And I actually have Virginia a little lower than I did last week, and I think I think they're a candidate to get beat in week 1. I haven't played the game, but I am looking at Pittsburgh in that game. Virginia's going to be a real public side, and I think Pittsburgh's kind of right in the mix with those teams. I think Pittsburgh may be getting downgraded too much because they lost the 2 1,000-yard running backs. But from the looks of things, they've got some good young talent at that position to step right in, and if that's the case, they might not be a team that you can write off automatically.
For Pitt, for them to have anything this year, they're going to have Kenny Pickett make a big leap forward because he was dismal last year. And they only survived because of that great running game that they had last year.
And the fullback, which they use a fullback, and he was very good.
So, they got some promising guys stepping in, and that's one thing that they have been able to do. They've had good running backs at Pitt for several years now. We know James Conner made the leap to the Steelers and filled in for Le'Veon Bell last year very well. But the quarterback play just bothers me. And then, we talked about it last week. This is a coach at Pitt that his background has been all defense, and yet ever since he's been at Pitt, the defense has not been good.
This defense looks like it might be better. On paper, anyway.
Can't look worse than last year.
No, I know. And they've got to find a way to solve the deep pass problems, which have plagued them for a few years. They won't run into that in week 1. I mean, Virginia's not a team that goes deep down the field. They've got a great quarterback,
Bryce
but he's not a deep thrower. To me, when I look at that division, I actually think North Carolina is the worst team in the conference. I think they're actually worse than Louisville.
But not GT though.
I'll say this: early, yes, but I think by the end of the season, Georgia Tech will have jumped over a couple of teams in the ACC.
And for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, Georgia Tech, for as long as I can remember, have been running the option, and they're totally changing the offense. Johnson's gone there, and again, we talk about this so much. When you have a new coach come in college football, it's not like in the NFL where you can't make wholesale roster changes. He's inheriting a lot of players that were recruited specifically for that offense. And now they're going to have to learn a pro-style offense, and they're going to have growing pains. It's going to take It's going to take a couple years for him to get his players into his system and change the landscape.
Yeah,
there.
They'll get murdered by Clemson, and they're probably going to struggle in their first few games. But I don't think it takes that long. And they've got some good athletes there. So if they, eventually once you get half a dozen games under your belt, I think you'll. And I'm not saying they're going to be good, but I'm saying down the stretch, you might actually start finding some value at Georgia Tech as they get better as the season goes along.
One thing about changing the schemes is, Georgia Tech has the fewest returning starters in football with 8 now. And
could be a blessing in disguise.
Right. It's not that bad that you're bringing in new people for your personnel and bringing in a lot of new people that first year. I am a Virginia Tech fan. You look at the returning starters, Miami only has 12, Virginia has 14, Virginia Tech has 16. You add in the Foster retiring, that's going to add something to the defense. You have an injury-riddled squad last year with Virginia Tech. So to me, I have Virginia Tech coming first out of the division, and then Miami and Virginia next after that, and followed by Pitt. North Carolina, I agree with you.
They stink.
One more point jumping back to why I have VT up there. When you look at the crossover games, both Miami and Virginia have to play Florida State, which I have higher. Virginia Tech's crossover games are Wake Forest and Boston College.
That's not too bad.
So you're 2-0 there.
Wake Forest, and look, I know Clausen will get the most out of the team.
But you have the easiest crossover games you possibly could have.
Yeah, so they're very winnable games.
You're 2-0 when the other teams are probably 1-1. That puts you up where I pick them as well to win that division. That's part of the reason. So, again, it's much different saying who the better team is or who you're picking to win a division because of the schedule and who's at home and who's in away. So that's a different story. Duke, I think, is going to be down again. Their crossover games are good, but Duke, despite their record last year, was minus 87 yards per game. That was by far the second worst besides Louisville in football. Right. So you have to look at what a team is bringing back, and more importantly, look at how that team did in conference play and what they did against those foes, and then what they bring back.
One thing I'll point out with Virginia Tech, I love Justin Fuentes as a coach. Did a marvelous job at Memphis, got him the job here. The first 2 years at Virginia Tech, they played very well for him. But as we say, the first 2 years, the majority of that was still Coach Beamer's players. Last year, they fell off. Now, they had some injuries, quarterback injury as well that hurt them. This is year 4. This is, he doesn't want to have another year like he had last year.
You can't be 6-7. Virginia Tech hasn't had a losing year in how many years? Yeah.
Louisville is mildly interesting because, and I did want to bring that up again this week because I thought it was a good point last week. I can't say I've never seen it, but it was as bad as I've ever seen in college football last year in terms of a team that just gave up. Yeah. You had a lame duck coach. Everybody knew he was going to be gone, and they were literally quitting in games. And I think you'll see Louisville at least be more competitive this year. And the odds makers kind of think so, too, because that's not an outrageously high line in their opener against Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a good-sized favorite, but, last year's Louisville team, even at home, what do you figure? The line's 21? And now it's, 15, 16, right in that range? So,
I have them. I think I have them 9 points better from my ending last year to this year. Yes. That's my personal
They'll be
power
competitive.
ratings.
They're still not going to win a lot of games, but they won't be a pushover like they were last year where they just didn't care.
Jawan Pass, second year in the system, should do better. He was a disappointment last year, but like you said, that whole team was.
Well, again, Jawan Pass in Petrino's system, now he's got an excellent coach with Scott Satterfield who took App State to levels that were unheard of. Yeah, I mean, he would be, if I could have hired one Group of 5 coach, it would have been him from what he did at App State and what they did against Power 5 teams when they played him. We'll see how it pans out, but to me, he was the best Group of 5 hire there was. One thing I do want to point out with Syracuse, and Syracuse went 4-8 and 4-8 in Dino Babers' first 2 years, jumped up to 10-3, and to me, you have to take it with a grain of salt because in 2017 they were minus 12 turnovers. Last year, they were plus 13. You improved by 25 turnovers, and yes, you're going to improve by 5 wins. If they take care of the ball again, we'll see what happens. But teams normally don't be negative turnover, go double-digit positives, and then be double-digit positives again. It comes to regress.
They've also got a guy who his intangibles are going to be really tough to replace, and that's the quarterback whose name just slipped my mind.
Syracuse?
Oh, they're replacing
Dungy.
They're replacing Tony Dungy.
I mean, he was
Eric
just
Dungy.
not
Tony Dungy.
Yeah, Eric Dungy. I mean,
Indianapolis Colts Sunday Night Football. Thanks.
Eric Dungy was maybe the best intangibles guy in all of college football. He was amazing.
All right, guys. We touched on Florida State before we head out. Where are you guys thinking them second year coach?
No, they'll be all right. I don't know. I think Ralph's higher on them than I am.
I am much higher on them, probably than most people in the country.
I think they're good.
Tell us why you're high, Ralph.
Well, again, Willie Taggart, you can look kids in the eye and say, listen, look what I did at USF. I took this program and I turned them around. You take these kids that were 7-6, went 5-7 last year. The secondary was decimated early on. You have 16 returning starters. You have a quarterback. You have your choice of quarterbacks. When you have a quarterback like James Blackman, who 2 years ago, Francois got hurt, and he had to play as a true freshman. He wasn't planning on playing. Starts 12 or 13 games. Then he gets to redshirt the first year in a new system, and now he gets to play. So you have an experienced quarterback that has a rested body from last year. And if not, you got Alex Hornerbrook, who started 39 games for Wisconsin. So, you have plenty of options. You have your number one running back. You have 4 of your top 5 receivers. You have 9 of your top 11 tacklers. I just think this is a talented squad that recruited well, that has a chip on their shoulder after having their first losing season in 40 years.
Yeah, we'll find out
being 5-7
quickly, because that's not a not a walkover in week 1 against Boise.
And week 3 at Virginia is going to be a true selling point if my numbers were correct or not.
All right, good stuff, guys, on the ACC. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Big Ten. And the Big Ten, a little more competitive this year. Interesting, some storylines. We'll see who these guys and myself like in the Big Ten. That's coming up next here on the WagerTalk Podcast.
It's Manic Monday, and that means every pick at WagerTalk.com is just $9. Get a play in any sport valued at up to $30 for just $9 each and every Monday at WagerTalk.com.
Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. It's part 2. We're going to look at another big conference, Power 5, and it is the Big Ten Conference. Guys, every year, for how long, it's been Ohio State and whoever else is going to try to challenge them. Ohio State, changing of the guard, lose the quarterback, lose the head coach, Urban Meyer, a legend. You guys tell me, is Ohio State, do they miss a beat?
Well,
I know they're still recruiting well.
I don't know that Ohio State misses a beat necessarily, but I will say that it is a now or to me, it's a now or never season for Michigan, because Michigan is on paper the best team in the conference. In fact, the 3 best, but here's the tough part, the 3 best teams in the conference are all in the same division, because I have Michigan State as the 3rd best team in the conference. And I've got Michigan as the best team in the conference, but I say that with at least some hesitation, Ralph, because as loaded as Michigan is, I don't trust them as much as I trust Ohio State. But I will, on paper, power ratings, I've got Michigan as the team to beat.
I have Ohio State a point higher still. That could be some bias. There is some Ohio State bias, and there's what Michigan has done. And, to me, it comes down to that last game, and Ohio State's a dog at Michigan at the end of the year. Michigan obviously has the best quarterback in the league, I believe, with Shea Patterson. And I've said this in numerous places. I don't think any coach has any more pressure on him in any game in the country this year than that Ohio State game with Jim Harbaugh. If you can't be Ryan Day in his first year, you are probably out.
100% agree.
So to me, I didn't have enough, although I have Ohio State a point stronger because they have to go to Michigan. I did not bet Ohio State to win the Big Ten. I didn't think there was enough value in that to do that. Michigan and Ohio State, to me, it is still 1-2. Those teams are still a touchdown better than anyone else.
See, and that I'll argue with, because I think Michigan State, I do have them third best, but I've got them all within 5 points of one another.
Yeah,
Michigan State is, I know it's a lot to ask, but if Michigan State is willing to maybe take a few more chances offensively. And that's the holdup.
You're asking a lot.
There are Dave. You've said this last week, so let's repeat it. There are option coaches more exciting than Mark D'Antonio.
He just is so like Woody Hayes style with the three yards in a cloud of dust. And I get it. The defense is the strength of the team, but I think you got to take some chances once in a while on offense and try and make something happen. Especially with the rules being the way they are. The rules favor the offense. Take advantage of it. Michigan State they're as good as anybody defensively. They're loaded on defense, but the question is, will they put enough points on the board to avoid losing a game they shouldn't lose somewhere along the line?
Well, they got 8 starters back on both offense and defense. You've got a quarterback back, but your quarterback had 8 TDs and 11 interceptions.
Well, but part of that is because they were so predictable on offense that he's constantly in 3rd and long. Because if you can stop the running game for a couple of downs, you got him in 3rd and long. And if you're trying to convert 3rd and long, your TD, your interception ratio is going to go up. And it has to.
You're looking back at last season, Dave, your point exactly. Scoring 13 against Arizona State, scoring 7 against Michigan, scoring 6 against Ohio State, and 6 against Nebraska.
Who was the team let me grab
Nebraska's defense was horrendous last year.
Utah State Open.
It was
the Arizona State game.
Okay, the Central Michigan game. This is a perfect example of why, and I respect him as a coach, but that's a 31-0 game. 31-0 in the second quarter. And they never scored. If memory serves me right, they never scored again. Didn't even cover the spread. It's like, Jesus. It drives you nuts watching the team because they actually let a garbage Central Michigan team get back in the football game.
And it cost them next week against Northwestern because then they couldn't move the ball the next week.
Yes.
They gave no one any confidence to move to Northwestern, and they scored 19 points at home as a 10.5-point favorite to Northwestern at that point and lose. So I completely agree that Michigan State is the 3rd best team in the Big Ten, let alone the 3rd best team in the division. Again, and the Spartans I think are going to be underrated early, and you're going to blow through a schedule where you are probably you're going to be 3-0. I think they beat Arizona State at home. Then they go to Northwestern. They have Indiana. So you have a good shot of being 5-0 before you face Ohio State. Problem is, you play at Ohio State and you play at Michigan.
That's going to be tough. Yeah. That makes it tough for them. And the other thing in that division is the massive separation between those teams. And then Penn State, which is okay.
Yeah, there's 3 at the top, 1 in the middle, and 3 at the bottom.
Then the bottom of that division, I don't think Indiana's as good as they were last year. I think Purdue's going to have a lot of trouble having a winning season and getting to a bowl game. And, Illinois is
Maryland and Rutgers are in their division.
Excuse me, I got it mixed up.
Indiana, Maryland, and Rutgers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't like Indiana. I think Indiana, in fact, I think they could have a tougher time than people think against Ball State in week 1.
Speaking of Indiana, and we talked about it last week, and Ralph tweeted this out earlier in the summer, but big sandwich spot with Indiana. Michigan plays Michigan State on November 16th.
At home.
Goes on the road the very next week and plays at Indiana the week before they play the big game against Ohio State.
The problem is I don't think Indiana's very good this season. I've got them down.
They're going to be getting points, so they don't have to be.
They're going to be getting
good.
a lot of points.
They'll be getting a lot of points. And they're going to need them.
I will say this though, and I've tweeted this out. I'm a big fan of DeBoer, their new OC. He came from Fresno State, turned that program around, came from Eastern Michigan. So I watched him at Eastern Michigan. He did the same thing at Fresno State. The players look much better under him in Indiana, but again, getting the Indiana talent to play to that level is a different story. But like I said, I have him as one of my top OCs in the country. He'll be a big improvement for that Hoosier squad if the quarterback can do what he's asked to do.
What do you think of him? Because there's a lot of people who are very high on the Indiana quarterback, and I got to tell you, I'm really not one of them.
You know what? I didn't watch that much, and I don't know. To me, there's still a battle between Renix and Ramsey. I don't know if they even named a quarterback because they're both taking reps. So if no one has stood out, I mean, it's going to be rare that both are playing at that level that it's that close. And probably both are playing down to a level where they can't.
Ramsey's the favorite to get the job.
I'll tell you this: they're not going to win any awards with their defense.
No.
They're going to have to outscore teams to win games, and I don't know if they're going to do that.
They allowed 30 points per game last year, and with 7 starters back, they're in that same category again. They lost their top 2 and 3 of their top 5 tacklers. So.
I think the defense could be, I'm not going to say the worst in the Big Ten, but it's in the running.
It'll be an over team.
Yeah. Now, the other division is where the action is.
Yeah.
Because you got 5 teams you can basically throw a blanket over.
Well, I'm going to go with the team that I look to make a big jump this year, and that's the Nebraska team. Oh. And I know a lot of people.
Everybody does.
Adrian Martinez is the real deal.
He's 4th in the Heisman right now. He's 10-1. Yeah, that's the Superbook. He's number 4, the number 4 top Heisman candidate.
And keep that in mind. And this is a game I'm using as a free play, so I'll just give it out now. I took laid 34 with Nebraska against South Alabama. And interestingly enough, it doesn't power rate that high for me. It power rated like 30 with the home field advantage, and I don't care because I know what Frost has tendencies that he showed at Central Florida, and he's got a guy he can showcase. I think he's going to do it. And you might see extra points scored by this team against weaker opposition for 2 reasons. One, to get Martinez more attention. And secondly, I really think he wants to instill that killer instinct culture that Central Florida had. So you take a game like South Alabama in week 1, and South Alabama could be the worst team in the Sun Belt. But beyond that, I think if he's got a chance to keep scoring, he's going to, even in week 1. And I wouldn't be surprised if they throw 60 up on South Alabama.
Let me go ahead and just add to Dave's statement. Scott Frost, if you remember, took over an 0-12 team at UCF in his first year, went 6-7. In his second year, they ended up going 13-0.
And killed
He
teams.
beat FIU 61-17 as a 17-point favorite. Went to Maryland as a dog, won 38-10. Hosted Memphis 4-point favorite, 40-13. Went to Cincinnati 17-point favorite, 51-23. Beat East Carolina 63-21, and then beat Austin Peay 73-33.
And that's why I laid the 34,
I'm
which is
now
now 30,
proving your point.
Yeah, which is now 30 as high as 36.5.
You still like it at that number? As a free play type bet?
Yeah, as a free play. Although I mean, like I'll say this many times between now and the end of the season, you got to be willing to jump in early. And get that closing line value when it's going to be available. And I knew that Nebraska line would move, and it did. I don't know if Nebraska's the best team in the division, though. And I've mentioned this all summer long, I really like this Minnesota team. Their team speed on defense is SEC level. And that's the way Fleck wanted it. He went out and he's recruited speed, and more speed. And it's a really good defense. If their offense improves, and I think there's a good chance it will, Minnesota can win that division. And I think at worst, they're going to be the second best team in the division. I had them ahead of Wisconsin. I had them ahead of Iowa. Who am I leaving out in that division?
Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Northwestern.
Oh, and Northwestern. I got them ahead of all those teams. And I really like this team. I think Nebraska could be playing for the Big Ten championship. Minnesota could be.
I've picked Nebraska to win the division as well. Again, they may not have as much talent as some of the other teams, but you're talking about a team with 16 returning starters. You're talking about a team that gets to host Wisconsin, gets to host Nebraska, and then they go
Minnesota?
Yeah,
Yes.
and then they go to Iowa.
That's why I'm picking Minnesota to win the division,
Yep.
because they get the home game with Nebraska.
You're talking about a crossover game with no Ohio State or Michigan. Their toughest crossover game, Penn State. They get them at home. You look at Nebraska. Nebraska has Ohio State. Iowa has Michigan and Penn State. Wisconsin has Ohio State and Michigan. So right there, you look at the crossover games. And then most importantly, we're talking about row the boat PJ Fleck. Last year, 32.9% of his starts were made by freshmen. Mm-hmm. The next highest team in all of college football was 22.3%. So he started over 10% more freshmen getting ready for this year.
Those kids are athletes, though.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, that's the thing. If you watch Minnesota last year, boy, they're athletic. Yeah, you would have thought you were looking at an SEC type of program, not in terms of their overall strength, but just this incredible team speed on defense. And
he's a master recruiter. Did
yeah.
that with Western Michigan, and he's done it again.
And that's SEC style, where they really do recruit speed on defense first. Yeah. And I like that recipe for Minnesota.
Ohio State is showing it in their secondary, the cornerbacks they've been drafting. Absolutely.
And you look, it is year 3. A lot of people say that's the key year of a new coach.
Because then you got almost all your own guys.
You got all your own guys. And look at it. He took over the team in 2017. He had a team that was 5-7. Took them to 7-6 last year, playing all of those freshmen. They have every license to make the big jump, returning 9 on offense and 7 on defense. Yeah, they're going to be there with Nebraska. To me, the difference for Nebraska and Minnesota is going to be, and you said you like the defense a lot on Minnesota. That's the one thing I don't like on Nebraska. They got to shore up that defense.
Yes, they
gave up 33 points a game last year. And
they gave up a ton of points late in games, which is why if you look at the scores from last year's game, they weren't that far from being 10-2.
Right.
I mean, they were actually really close to being 10-2. They had that many close losses, but they couldn't stop anybody in games, and it killed them. So they do have to fix that area.
Marco, you talk about sandwich spots and scheduling spots off, and the big game just between amongst us as we're talking about Nebraska and Minnesota. When they face off on October 12th, Nebraska's going to have hosted Ohio State and then host Northwestern in homecoming and then have to go to Minnesota. When Minnesota hosts Nebraska, they're off a home game against Illinois with a game at Rutgers on deck.
Not bad,
Huge scheduling spot for Minnesota when they face off against each other.
That's game of the year material only. We don't do games of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Anybody else like anybody?
I want to talk about Iowa for a moment.
With only 10 returning starters.
This is going to be a real interesting year because the Iowa fan base is fascinating.
The best tradition in all of sports now.
It's
waving to the hospital is absolutely the best.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But they aren't thrilled with Kirk Ferentz because it's kind of like year after year after year they go and they'll have an occasional run where they get off to a 6-0 or 7-0 start. It's like, oh boy.
They had their 12-2 in 2015.
Yeah. And I just I don't know. I just look at that team and I'm just.
But isn't he like Bill Snyder? Isn't he there until he wants to be there?
I guess. But
be careful what you wish for.
What
right?
happens if they go 6-7 or 6-6 or perish the thought 5-7 and don't get to a bowl?
Yeah, they had that one losing year in 2012, and that's it.
They haven't had more than 7 wins in a while.
In this division, now there's no one at the level of the top 3. Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State in this division. But there's only one bad team in the entire division. The other teams, Northwestern is down this year, and they're projected to be down, but Northwestern's still going to be pretty good.
And we saw Purdue against Ohio State last year bring some talent to the
What happens if Iowa finishes 5th in the division and misses a bowl game? Do you think at that point it's like, okay, we have to start thinking about making a change because we just aren't keeping up with the Joneses? And Iowa State, by the way, this is the worst thing for Iowa fans. Iowa State might have gone past them now.
Yeah, it'll be a big game on September 14th. Iowa's coming off that game September 14th, Iowa's coming off their opener. Granted, it's Rutgers, but it's still your Big Ten opener at home. And then they go to Iowa State. Iowa State is off a bye before they face Iowa. Another huge scheduling spot for the Cyclones. And, I have Matt Campbell as one of my highest-rated coaches now. I just love the guy.
I didn't think they'd keep him.
Yeah,
I thought Matt Campbell would be gone already.
Yeah,
that's a great score for the Cyclones to be able to keep Matt Campbell.
Just say one thing before you go, Ralph, with Ferentz. This is a spot where Iowa, when you have these coaches that have such long tenure, and we saw it, Bill Snyder, you mentioned at Kansas State.
But it finally started to wear out. I mean, it was there, but Kansas State really hasn't been they haven't been relevant the last few years.
It's almost, in the other example I'm going to bring up, they did get rid of them, but for a different reason, the stuff that happened at Penn State. But the last couple of years that Joe Paterno was there before the incident that happened there, the offense was... you start losing recruits because they don't want to come and play in an archaic offense.
Yes, they look like they'd be, and I'm sorry to say this, but that's just the way it is. At the end of Paterno's regime at Penn State, they should have been playing their games on black and white TVs.
Yeah,
because they were boring.
Let me just add this: we talk about these coaches that have been there forever. I mean, nobody did it better than Stoops. Leave 11-2, 11-2, turn it over to Lincoln Riley. Yeah. You go 12-2, 12-2. Urban Meyer might be close. We'll see if Ryan Day can continue the streak of turning it over to a guy that's been there and sort of have that coach in waiting to take over. But again, Iowa doesn't have those assistant coaches like Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama that get paid more than probably half of college football head coaches. Half of the group of 5 head coaches, or even more.
Well, even Frank Beamer, when he left, Virginia Tech, they went outside the program.
There was another archaic guy for you there.
In a way, he was. Yeah. Their program it was still very respectable,
yes. and
but it wasn't at the same level it was.
Yeah, and the players loved him, but you just can't compete with these other programs with those kind of offenses.
Yeah.
You got to open it up. Ralph, anything else?
Three TNAs, Marco. These are just Big Ten angles that have had great records for people to pay.
TNA stands for?
Trends and angles.
I thought TNA.
When Kelly and I are doing those TNA videos, that's what you were thinking. Iowa 16. Iowa with Ferentz 16-1-1 against the spread as an away favorite. Northwestern 4-21-1 over under as a home favorite. And Ohio State 15-2 ATS as a dog. That'll be the Michigan game.
Well, and I found out just now that, hey guys, you want to go out and check out some TNA? I didn't know we were going to go out and look. At my age, it's probably better to look for trends and angles.
Good stuff there. And the Northwestern stat, well, we all know last year, if you blindly took the favorite.
Oh, my God.
Or took the dog in Northwestern games.
That's been been probably 3 of the last 4 years.
They're off and running as a big dog in week 1 at Stanford.
Yeah.
So,
It's, if it ain't broke, guys, don't fix it. I wish some guys would use that philosophy and managers with their pitchers this year, but.
You're a Pittsburgh guy, and I don't mean to start going off on a tangent here, but
now you're sounding like Perez Cokin.
How is Clint Hurdle still managing a baseball team? He's terrible.
Dave, it's 4-21, and it's probably going to come to an end this year. I think that the Pirates, they hit that little window.
He had a man on second with nobody out in the bottom of the ninth the other night, and he bunted. A man on second, you can't, and down 4-3, you can't do that. Jesus. This guy hasn't even heard the word analytics.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. But I had to get a Clint Hurdle shot in there. I'm listening.
It's 4-21. You can take all the shots.
I don't want to hear the old guy stuff because Hurdle and me are about the same age. And I've been able to make some changes over the years and embrace the analytics, so how come he can't?
He got a lot of extra rope because this team had gone so long without being in the playoffs, and we had that little mini run for a couple years. We had the wild card game that 1 year. We win the wild card game, then lose to St. Louis, and then we had 2 years in a row where we had the stupid wild card game and faced Jake Arrieta whenever he was.
But at least you got in.
And then Baumgartner the other year, and That's why I hate the one game play in for the baseball.
Well,
Would you
in
rather
any
not
event-
even make it? And just,
Yeah, really.
You know what? To me, I'm sorry. It was like being in high school and going out on a date and just getting teased all night, because that you get to the playoffs and you get one game. That's not being in the playoffs. I'm sorry. I felt so
Good analogy.
unsatisfied.
I like that.
Remember how KGB, said to
She gave you her gum and that was it. That was the closest.
Yeah, it was like, you come in for a quickie, you feel all satisfied. Well, I didn't, okay? We came in for that quickie in the playoffs, and I definitely was not satisfied with
I don't
the
mind
results.
it. I actually like it. It makes it puts extra people in the seats. It makes it a little more
At least
exciting.
you got a chance.
And you have to work your ass off. Yeah, are you at a disadvantage? Absolutely, but that's what the advantage for being the number one seed is.
The Royals were a wild card team, won the World Series.
Yeah. It makes for leading up to it. It keeps the excitement for the season going for having that extra wild card. No question about that. But then once the season ends on that Sunday and you made it in and you only have one game and you lose it, it's just a feeling that it just sucks. It just I don't know. I'm not a fan of it.
Okay, do you want to be a Browns fan?
Well, you can be a college football fan and your team can finish 6-6 and you get to go to friggin' Shreveport or something. Yeah. Whoop-de-doo.
Hell, there's going to be
no offense to Shreveport.
Three more bowl games this year. There's going to be a handful of 5 and 7 teams.
Today.
No, I mean I'm sure Shreveport's a very nice place, but it's not someplace I want to go for a bowl.
That's
game.
the Max Sunbelt game anyway.
Let me go to the Bahamas or something like that. It's like now we're talking, but Shreveport, okay.
Dave's spoiled. All right,
it's better than Mobile, Alabama.
It's not as good as Las Vegas.
No,
that's a bowl game trip.
It's going to be when they get the new stadium. With the new stadium,
SEC teams coming in and the Big Ten. I'll tell you what, Ohio State fans coming in, and there's going to be 40,000 of them whenever they play here. Will be a wild, wild weekend whenever they're here.
Yes,
absolutely.
Looking forward to it, and we're making references to the new Oakland Raiders Stadium. That's
new Las Vegas
Allegiant Stadium. Yeah, we've got the name. Well, how much did they pay for the
$25 million?
$25 million.
And I can't believe an MGM didn't pay $25 million. That seems nothing. That's like what? All they have to do is raise resort fees by another $1, and they would make that up in a year.
All right. Our bid was nowhere near it for WagerTalk.
We're a little bit short.
We were a little bit short.
we bid 26, right?
Yeah.
Dollars.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to head to Handicapper's Corner, a little preseason talk, and then a couple season win totals from Ralph and I. That's up next here on the WagerTalk Podcast.
Every Tuesday, WagerTalk.com offers a best bet selection from its hottest handicapper. It's a great way to introduce yourself to WagerTalk.com with a big best bet winner for just $2 on $2 Tuesday.
Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. It's time for Handicapper's Corner, and, well, it is NFL preseason time. Action is in full bloom. We're recording on Thursday night, and there is the majority of the schedule on tap for tonight. There's a few games left for the weekend. Don't really have any picks for you on those games at this point because, Ralph, explain to our listeners real quick the process of the things that you go through when you're picking preseason, and you've had outstanding success. I've done well in the preseason, but I am very, very selective. I don't have a lot of plays. You have more plays than I do during the preseason, and you've got the numbers, great results. Tell our listeners what you do during the course of the week leading up to making some your preseason picks.
Thanks, Marco. 68% over 4 years. And really, I made the WagerTalk preseason guide because that's information I look at. And Johnny emailed me today. We set a new record on downloads. So if you haven't gotten it, it's a free download. Go to WagerTalk, go to the Cal Sports page, download the guide. You're going to look at, there's a page for each team. And not only do I want you to download it today, I want you to download it every Monday because every weekend I update the quarterback stats. You could see how the quarterbacks did, who got sacked how many times defenses are blitzing. Those are important things when to look at it. Quarterback rotations are obviously important. Teams that have 3 quarterbacks, I am much more apt to play on those teams. You get more reps in practice. You get more playing time when you get on the field. Teams that have 5 quarterbacks, the exact opposite. Coaches have tendencies. We have the last 3 years of records of going back. Coaches have tendencies on week 1, week 2, week 3. You have the history to go back to look at how those coaches did. OCs and DCs changes. They are bright red in my guide. They stick out. Absolutely. I'm going to mention we are recording this just before the Thursday games are starting. But one game that was close to being a play to me, For it to be a play, I have to have check marks on the positive side for one team and a negative on the other. And I didn't have those negative check marks on the Giants, so I didn't use this as a game, but I gave it out as an opinion, and it was on the New York Jets. Well, Greg Williams is their new DC. If you look back at Cleveland the last 2 years, a huge part of why Cleveland was 7-1 straight up in ATS in the preseason is Greg Williams and the Cleveland Brown defense had 28 sacks. When you're disruptive against an offense that doesn't audible or call out of blitzes, those quarterbacks take huge numbers of sacks. Greg Williams, now the new DC of the New York Jets, I expect the Jets defense to keep that same type of blitzing. And then reading information, week in and week out, day in and day out. Going to NFL.com, watching the press releases on TV, going to the local papers, reading those. Going to Sports Spider is another site I like where you can go and read tweets for the teams of who's going to sit and who's going to play. So it really is however you handicap the NFL regular season, throw it out. It's completely different. Don't worry about betting on good teams or bad teams because of name recognition or head coaches. Look at how those teams only do in the preseason, and you got to change your handicapping technique towards that. But again, the guide's available for free. And then on Monday, it'll be updated with all the week 1 stats. And
Ralph, and just to elaborate on what you're talking about and how reading stuff, you find tidbits that you get, coaches saying stuff. And it's the one time of the year that the coaches don't talk with smoke screens. They talk for the most part, except Andy Reid. Tell you the truth. We've talked about the 3 best coaches, point spread wise, for preseason football has been Harbaugh, Zimmer, and then Pete Carroll. Yep. Today, you told me about, you read some tidbits on Seattle and Pete Carroll's not playing Russell Wilson. First time Russell Wilson's not taken a snap in a preseason game. And a lot of the other starters, because you read that they played a very hard practice the day before. It was a good practice, and he's sitting out the starters not to get injuries. So you have a situation where you're playing a team in Denver which already played a Monday.
Game under the belt is huge, absolutely.
That's an angle that a lot of people have used, and it's something that the sports books know about too, and they start to adjust to that. And then you get the people that do their diligence, read articles and so forth. That line went from Seattle -2 that you had on an opener based on just the history and everything with Pete Carroll to today we were looking at Denver -3. That much of a difference, a 5-point swing in preseason. We never saw 5-point numbers in preseason before, let alone have swings like that. So, again, that's a great point. And so to that, we say, okay, well, why don't you have some opinions on the games for Saturday, Friday night? You find these things out day of in reading the
coaches don't tell you until the day before or the day of what's happening. And, it can change. It changes an entire concept. And, what Pete Carroll said is, he goes, I'm changing the way I handicap preseason games. And we had a practice with 1s against 1s. It was the longest and best practice we had. Well, if you're practicing the day before a game, 1s against 1s, those 1s aren't playing in the game. So, again, Pete Carroll was one of the best preseason coaches. Last year, I think he went 1-3 or 0-4, but he had a new OC and a new DC, and he was changing concepts. And now it doesn't matter to him. So we'll see what happens. And you have to learn. I mean, right now we know what Pete Carroll said. You have to mentally or actually physically jot those notes down. I actually jot those notes down to go back and look. what happened after the game to see if what he said was legitimate. I mean, that's the important thing. We have, 9 new head coaches, 7 of them brand new, 2 of them, the Gase and Arians are experienced head coaches with new teams. But when new coaches say something, write it down, and then you have to learn what they said. Was it legitimate? Was it embellished? Or was it just flat out not true? And then watch them week after week as you build a very detailed description on each head coach.
And I'm going to tell our listeners that they should really check out your full NFL preseason package. And the reason I'm going to say that is when you're signed up for a subscription rather than buying daily, you're going to get the play the minute it is released.
And I don't even put all my plays up for daily sales. Yeah. So the only way you can get part of that record that's been 68% over 4 years is to buy a 7-day package or multiple 3-day packages or the 149 for the entire preseason.
And I'm going to tell you a little history lesson with Ralph. Going back to his days when he was at North Coast, North Coast used to be known for the newsletter. Everybody knew about the September 5-star regarding Power Sweep newsletter. That was one of the big plays back in the day, every September. But before you ever got to September, preseason football, you guys put preseason football on the map, in my opinion, so much so that the minute you guys released your plays, they were moving offshore.
Well, there were thousands of people playing them because, every Power Sweep customer
got the preseason
got
free.
The full, and then we got cut to 2 weeks of the preseason. So, yeah, no question. I mean, a lot of that was because of success.
You were the major part of doing all of that.
Phil was vital early on, and then Phil started to just not do as little. And the last few years, the last year I was at North Coast, prior to leaving that final week before the season, it was a 9-0 preseason, if those people remember 3 years ago, and that was just completely me with doing all the plays and Phil being out of it. So I don't know what their success rate has been, but certainly I give kudos to Phil and a lot of things that he taught me through all those years handicapping preseason.
All right, good stuff. And did you bring that check with you for that endorsement? No. Ralph's laughing like, yeah, sure. Yeah, you got fat chance on that. All right.
I'll give you a discount, Marco.
Yeah, okay.
You can pay $148.
Okay. I'll look at the back end. What do you got for us? You got this couple season win totals?
We decided to each pick 2 season win totals, and people have a couple weeks to bet and look at what we like. And both of mine are from the NFC West. And a lot of it is when you're handicapping divisions and you're pulling wins and losses out. If you have a team that you think is going to beat the opposition twice, that's an over and that's an under thought for me. But, Arizona, to me, I am not buying into the hype. Cliff Kingsbury was 13-35 as a head coach in Big 12 action. He was going to be an OC, and all of a sudden Arizona comes up. He was going to be an OC at USC, and all of a sudden, boom, now you're an NFL head coach because you coached Kyler Murray when he was young. And yes, Kyler Murray did incredible things. Folks, this is the NFL. It's not the hype you're going to be. Arizona was minus 117 yards per game last year. That was the second worst number in the last 8 years in the NFL. Arizona is going to be a dog in every game this year, with the exception of week 1 against Detroit. That game's right around pick'em. So they could pull 5 upsets this year, and this total can still be cashed. It's either 5 or 5.5, depending on where you get it. I am all in on Arizona under the total.
All right. Well, I'll give my under, since we both have an over and an under. My under, I've given this out on some other shows already, and I'll make no bones about it. We like Baltimore under 8.5 season win total. The Ravens, you're looking at a division that still has the Steelers, and you guys all know, and my home city of bias aside, I love the Steelers to win the division. You've got all the hype on Cleveland this year. Cleveland obviously going to be very much improved. You got Baltimore, who was a 10-win team last year. So you look at that 10 wins and you say, hey, they over 7, over the 8.5 shouldn't be a problem here. Well, let's remember that they went with Lamar Jackson. They were able to get that gimmick offense to the finish line at the end of the season. It worked for them until they got into the playoff game. I just don't think you're going to be able to play the way they did last year and run the football with Lamar Jackson and win on the NFL level. I know they're going to try it. I know they'll have some wrinkles to it this year, but you also have some game film on Lamar Jackson as well. And I think that the Chargers kind of put the blueprint out last year on how to stop them. So I'm just not sold on Baltimore. Their defense took a couple hits, losing some players from last year's squad. I just don't see this happening this year. For them to get to 9 wins, for us to lose this wager in this division, Cleveland's going to have to underachieve immensely, and the Steelers are going to have to drop off dramatically. I just don't see it. I'm going to go ahead and take under 8.5, and I know you want to say something.
A lot of people do agree with you, right? Because that opened up 8.5 at like plus 120, and now it's like minus something the other. So it's close to moving. So if you want to grab that 8.5, I suggest you do it in the next couple days and not wait, because it looks like it's going to be about to flip down to 8. So there's a lot of advantage in that half point.
Absolutely. Ralph, who's your over?
Well, color me Garoppolo.
Oh, boy.
We all know the Giants got so much hype, and Garoppolo had won those 4 games the year before and then got hurt after a couple games last year. Well, I think that hype was just 1 year early. Last year, you look, and they went 4-12. Well, that 4-12 record is not indicative of how the team played, even with Garoppolo. Marco, did you know that they were plus 14 yards per game? That is almost like an 8-6 team, or a 10-6 team, or a 9-7 team. The problem was San Francisco was minus 25 in turnovers. Only one team in the NFL in the last 15 years has been worse than minus 25 turnovers in a game. That was my Cleveland Browns when they went 0-16. And what did they do the next year? They went 7-8-1, improved by 7.5 games. And in fact, since 2004, every team that was minus 20 turnovers or more improved on average of plus 6.4 wins. I think Bosa's a great boost. Bosa did get hurt. He's out for the preseason now. It's an ankle injury. I don't expect him to miss more time than that. I think the Garoppolo offense and who they got, I believe the Philly wide receiver off the top of my head and the Atlanta running back are great boosts to the offense. The LA Rams I still have ahead of them, but I think the Giants are clearly a 10-win team and playoff bound.
All right, Ralph.
I said this Giants as we're thinking San Fran. I meant the 49ers and not the New York Giants. So it is San Francisco 49ers over the total. And Marco, the fourth and final NFL season win total, your overplay for this segment.
Okay, what year is this?
This is 2019, if I am right.
Okay, that is correct. You get to go to the bonus round. That is a odd year. I'm going to go back since 2013 with the Carolina Panthers. You want to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? This is a team that is either really good or really mediocre. And 2013, they went 12-5. The even year, 2014, they did make the playoffs. They made the playoffs winning 7 games during the regular season and made the playoffs with a 7-9 record sneaking in. 2015, they go 17-2 and go to the Super Bowl. 2016, 6-10, missed the playoffs. 2017, another odd year. They go 11-6 and go to the playoffs. And last year, 2018, the odd year, 7-9. So just on that pattern alone, they're looking to bounce back as a double-digit team. This is one of those situations where, and I used to remember this, and you might remember it too, Ralph, because it was our division. The Cincinnati Bengals I'm going back decade before. They would
Penny Stabler days?
They would have a good year, then a bad year. Good year, then a bad year. And to me, it was the strength of schedule. Because when they would have the good year.
But they did mean more back then because now there's only 2 games difference. Because you're playing at 2 divisions, and there's only 2 games where you're playing a reciprocal team from another division. So it did mean more back in the day. Then, where now it's only a 2-game difference. But, yeah, I completely agree. There's something bizarre about that Panthers team with the up and downs, with the odds and evens.
And then you look at them last year, and they finished the season. They won their last game of the season, and it was a meaningless game for the Saints at the time. But Carolina had lost 7 in a row before that, Ralph. 5 of the 7 games, they lost by a touchdown or less. And several of them were field goal or less. They were close games. And let's not forget, the last couple games Cam Newton played, he was playing with half an arm. I mean, it was like he had the shoulder problem. He couldn't throw downfield. He was basically running the football and throwing short, patterns. It wasn't the full offense being able to run at the end of the season. And this is a team that still was competitive. Even though they lost 7 in a row, they were in those games. I think they flipped this around easily this year.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in close wins and close losses. Again, going back to the Phil Steele days. And the NFL, from top to bottom, I mean, it's so tightly packed that when you have these big turnovers, people regress back to the normal. When you have the close wins, close losses, people regress back to the median. And same with like yards per play. When you have a crazy yards per play because you had 7 punt return touchdowns or something crazy, or had so many defensive touchdowns where your YPP was so far off, you return back to normal. And I am very much, when I look at the NFL, I agree with you, Marco, that close wins and close losses is a very important category to handicap.
And so with that said, if we have a healthy Cam Newton, I like Carolina over. And I got to say, Ralph, if Carolina would miss the playoffs again,
could be a change. Yeah, I agree with you. 3 out of 4 years and back-to-back. And, don't worry about Cam Newton's not playing tonight on Thursday. Cam Newton may not play the preseason. It doesn't mean anything. He's fine. He's practicing. He's healthy. So don't look into the fact if you don't see him take any snaps in the preseason at all.
All right, that wraps up Handicapper's Corner for tonight. We're going to take our last break of the night, and when we come back, it's going to be best bet time. Ralph and I are going to share a play with you for the weekend.
Week 1 college football.
Or week 1 college football. Well, I guess Ralph's going with a football play. I will have a baseball play for you. That's up next here on the WagerTalk Podcast. Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. It is best bet time. Guys, I want to tell you, next week we will have Will Bernanke back on the show as we do with going behind the counter. He was on vacation this week, and we wanted to have him in talk some football. We will have him next week for you, so just something to look forward to there. And, Ralph, it is best bet time, and you're going to go to college football Week 1, who do you got for us?
Well, I don't think it's going to be any surprise. Those people that listen to
our ACC preview,
ACC, and you
is there a team you're high on?
Realize I am that high on Florida State.
Or are you just high?
You're looking at a team that had its first losing season in 50 plus years, I believe. They went 5-7. You have Taggart in his second season. You have two experienced quarterbacks battling it out. You have 16 returning starters. You have Boise State traveling, and Boise State has not been that same team that people remember in the Fiesta Bowl and what they've done. I mean, they're down a couple notches. They're going to have a freshman or a sophomore new quarterback to handle this Florida State defense. Boise's going to have to go to Jacksonville and deal with that heat and humidity. I made this line 10, and it's still Florida State 4. It very well, if the line stays where it is and Florida State doesn't have any damaging injuries, it will be on my card as one of my plays that opening weekend of college football. So Florida State, bet it now if you can, minus the 4 against Boise State. Marco, baseball play for this weekend?
There is a baseball play for this weekend, Ralph, and we are going to look at team that Cincinnati and the Cubs. And I'm going to look at Trevor Bauer. He is making his second start for his new team, the Cincinnati Reds. But
did he win his first?
The first one, one second here. He played at Atlanta, had the loss. He went into the fifth inning, gave up 3 runs.
Normally I'd follow
it was
that.
It was a 5-4 loss.
Football started, so I was out of sight, out of mind.
But that was on the road, and that was against Atlanta. This will be his first start at home for Cincinnati, back in the state of Ohio. I think in front of the home crowd, he's going to be pumped up. We know, that first start, let's face it, too, he had that meltdown in Kansas City 2 starts ago.
It was an ugly ending, period.
Yeah.
Yep.
And to have that 2 days later basically be traded, there were rumblings and rumors that he was going to get traded. Even you said preseason. Which I couldn't understand then.
Well, because we weren't going to be able to resign both him and Kluber. So they were trying to get one of them and get whoever they could get the best trade value from, whoever wanted the Kluber, the experienced, or the younger guy with potential years. So they've had to deal with this all year long. So Bauer had a very stressful season. So his blow-up was just part of everything that just kept expanding the entire season long.
And then you got to, people talk about the first start, you're pumped up. Yeah, they are pumped up. But remember, too, you got to, in a matter of days, you're pitching for one team today and you're pitching for another team tomorrow. Granted, a pitcher has days in between starts, but you still got to get your affairs in order.
You got to deal with batting.
Yeah.
That's a big deal for an American League pitcher who spent the American League your entire career, now having to go up and bat for the first time on the road.
So, but he's also going to have an advantage where in this series you're not having the advantage. He's coming to the American League. He did have he faced the Cubs many times in the playoffs with the World Series game, and he pitched well against them the 2 playoff starts he had. I'm going to go with him, and I'm looking at Yu Darvish for the Cubs. Yu Darvish on the road, he's had 11 starts, Ralph. The Cubs have lost 8 of his 11 road starts. Now, I know he's pitched recently some better games, but still, the numbers there, they don't win with him on the road. I expect a big game out of Bauer, and I'm going to jump on Cincinnati, and I'm going to give you a couple stats on the Cubs, and one of the reasons why I do like this game. Cincinnati in this game has come up the favorite with Bauer. Obviously, he's going to now be their ace. Moving forward.
He was the Cleveland's ace with Kluber hurt. So,
and the Cubs this year, when they have been a underdog, they are just 8-20 this year.
Yeah, win as a favorite, win at home, lose on the road, lose as a dog.
And when they're a road underdog, it's 6-18. A little bit worse numbers. But I'm going to go ahead and roll with this one here. Darvish, night games this season. He's 4. The Cubs are 4-11 in his night starts. And when the total is 9 or 9.5 this season, Darvish just 1-7 in those starts. All of that, Bauer being second start, now, situated, want to make a good impression in front of your new team at home crowd. Back in Ohio, I look for a big outing. I like Cincinnati with the Cubs. Now, they're playing tonight, so we don't know the outcome of tonight's game, but both teams came into tonight's game hot. The Cubs had won 5 of their last 6, while Cincinnati has won 4 of their last 5. And Cincinnati, the good part with them is during that streak, Ralph, they started scoring runs. And Cincinnati, it's several times this year, they were a great under team because since he wasn't scoring runs, but they've scored in their last 5, 4, 6, 7, 8 runs. And, 6, 7, 8 has been the last 3 getting, more run production in each game. So I'm going to go ahead, take the Cincinnati Reds and Trevor Bauer Friday night as my best bet for the show. Guys, I want to thank you for listening to the show tonight. I want to thank our producer, Jared, for making us be heard this week with the podcast. Usually I just say making us sound good, but this week we're just happy you had you guys to be able to hear us.
Jumping the gun, Marco?
Well, yeah, they still got to, transfer the file. But
Jared, go ahead and grab the microphone, because normally we bring Mark on for a segment, and we don't want...
You want to defend yourself?
We want people to know that it was a technical glitch and not you.
No, okay, but at the same time, even if the technology goes wrong, someone has to take responsibility. Like, why didn't I double check it?
Would we blame that on you if it was technology's fault?
No,
obviously.
Yeah, we would.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, I blame myself. How about that?
Jared's a great guy, guys.
Yeah, we're just having some fun with him. So, hey, you got to hear a good show. We didn't have to practice as hard for this show. We did it last week, and Ralph's trying every week. He tries to shoot at it, his drink.
When the other guy was here.
Yeah. Blame that on Jared, too. Okay. All right, guys, enough of the ending. Thanks for listening to the Wager Talk podcast. Thanks to Jared behind the mic. Thanks to my guys in studio, Ralph Michaels and Dave Cokin. Big shout out to those guys in Detroit that gets this show up and out to all of the media platforms. You can subscribe on iTunes, listen on Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all of the other podcast platforms. Until next week, I am Marco D'Angelo. Let's cash some tickets.